Hello, everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the TakeCast. Davis Mattek with you here, joined by Brian Hooper. Normally, these episodes are on the Patreon feed, but as you guys might have noticed, it was a Brian bit ambitious to think that we could crank out a 2-hour podcast in the middle of doing all of the fantasy football content over on the paid feed. Obviously, those will return. We owe the people a Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power Season 2 recap podcast. We're not going to get into that here. Let's save it. I don't want to argue. I do not want to argue about Rings of Power. I don't know. But I don't want to talk about it just yet. So, I think this is where I want to begin. How is your DFS season going? This is the first year I've used Sims for main. I've used Sims for Showdown for 2 years with good results. Not doing post-contest simming for Showdown, which I think is interesting. My dupe numbers have been pretty low, but how is your DFS season going?
Well, if you only play GPPs and you don't take first, you're not going to have a good time. So I haven't taken it first, so I'm down. But last 2 weeks have been fine. The post-contest Sims, I only look at Saber Sims. I don't have a Solver account. And I don't use Saber Sims numbers, and I'm usually doing pretty good in their post-contest sim ROI, which is really a good sign because these sims, and I don't know the inner workings of all of them, but I'm almost positive they're all probably pretty similar. They're really biased to the projections of the company that makes the projections. So if you're using someone else's or your own projections in their contest sims and showing a strong ROI, you're probably almost definitely on the right track.
Yeah, that's so interesting because it highlights one of the larger universal truths about Sims, particularly not post-contest Sims, but pre-lock Sims. So a lot of what I'm doing is using the solver and Sim Labs and Run the Sims to just kind of see what with Sim Labs and with Run the Sims, I can basically just see directionally what is the field not doing and what seems like it is exploitable. And then I'm just kind of checking stuff in the solver to see what Sims out is plus ROI. And it is kind of funny because the inputs for all three of those places are going to be different. Roto Grinders is going to have different projections than ETR. Run the Sims is going to have different projections from ETR and from RG. And if you see something recurring in positive ROI lineups across the three of those, directionally, I suppose what it means is, I guess the field is not doing this enough. It's not even so much about the players. It's about what is the field not doing enough. Generally, it's shitty quarterbacks. Generally, my analysis this year in NFL DFS is that it's being unwilling to play Joe Flacco, being unwilling to play Daniel Jones, things like that. The field gets really locked in on pretty narrow parts of the game tree at quarterback.
Yeah, that I don't have a problem with that because I just do what it says. Yeah, I know you really struggle with doing what the Sims say sometimes.
Not really. Honestly, I will say the way I'm playing this year, not really. I'm not really forcing much fancy stuff. I'm not doing. I apply a little bit of ball knowing where I think a projection might have a lot of margin for error. It's projections are such a funny thing with NFL DFS because it's closer to projecting baseball than it is to projecting basketball. Basketball projections are just going to be really good. It's you project the minutes, you project the rates, and you extrapolate that out. Obviously, there's a band within those projections for guys to do better or worse, but football is so driven by events. It's so driven by one guy misses a shoestring tackle and that completely alters the experience. And some players are more volatile is not even the right word because volatility just comes inherent in gambling. It's some players are just more prone to things either breaking their way or not breaking their way in the case of a game, and that's really where the ball knowing comes in.
Some of that stuff is outcome based too, though. People,
of course,
yeah. So you have to be able to wrap your head fully around Sims to kind of understand.
And I pretty clearly don't, right? Like
No,
I
you kind
think
of do.
what do people say? I'm directionally accurate with the Sims. Like I kind of get what they are doing, but I don't. I mean, if you ask me on my podcast right now, like, what is a sim doing? I know what a public facing sim is doing is it is simulating your opponent's lineups and then simulating your lineup and telling you what percentage of the time it's good, what percentage of the time it's bad. But I don't really know what that means, to be honest. Like I really don't. Like, so it's simulating it. What is it simulating? It's simulating the contest because these public facing sims are not simulating the games, right? They're not simulating the actual NFL games. They're simulating the contest with the inputs you give them, correct?
No, well, they should be simulating the game and the contest. So if you've ever, which I know you have, downloaded a post contest CSV, so you go to DraftKings after the Millie Maker's over, and you could download the results. That's what a contest. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat, right? So there's contest sims, there's equilibrium sims, which we talk about on our Battle Royale show we do with Nerdy. So there's a bunch of different ways you could do it, but a contest sim is really just taking that CSV, and this is theoretically, and then saying, okay, what if here's the field? Let's run the game sims on top of this and see which lineups were best. That's the post contest sim. The pre contest sim is trying to do the exact same thing, except it doesn't know the CSV. It can't download the CSV till the contest is over, so they have to guess at the field. But they still should be using some form of player or game sim on top of that content on that field guess. And the field guessing is a lot harder than people would think. I imagine not just like the coding and stuff, but like getting it similar to actually how people will play. And there's like a lot of different tricks you should be doing to make those more accurate. And there's definitely a lot of issues with the current iteration of public facing contest sims, which is good because we don't want it too sharp yet. So we're done playing DFS.
I want to bring up one of those issues that I've really noticed. So one of the big issues, well, maybe you can tell me this is not an issue, is that I have one simple trick. You can go into your favorite pre-lock sim of choice and tell it to do 4 players from a team, 5 players from a team, just super mega stack a team. Purdy is the one I always notice this with when I'm running stuff, like a Brock Purdy, Jordan Mason, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle lineup. I can get the solver to tell me it's like a 180% ROI lineup. And I think there's something in there that is directionally true, which is that the field is maybe not overstacking enough, particularly in these smaller contests like the Spy or the Red Zone, like 4,000 entries, 5,000 entries, things like that. But I have a really hard time wrapping my head around those truly being plus EV teams because it will do it in any iteration, right? Like I could do it with the Giants. I could do it with a shitty team, and it will tell me it's not the ROI is not going to be as high because the raw projections are not as good. And something in that makes me think like this can't possibly be right. There's something that it's missing. It's not weighing in the correlations correctly. Something is wrong there.
And it might be without impugning any specific company here. Their play-by-play sim or whatever they're using instead of a play-by-play sim might be wrong. And it might not take into account because like a play-by-play sim, like a viewer detailed one would be like if we're playing football, Davis throws to Brian catches it. Okay, that means that Pete didn't get the ball. So what? Like now we're gonna do that. However many plays there are in this game, did they score a touchdown? What did the other team do? And all that correlation should be baked in. And then you do it a couple 100,000 or 1,000,000 times, depending, like on how much time you have, etc. And it should tell you, those answers. And so if you don't do that right, just like the field sim, if you then say like take that example, like you were kind of alluding to right there, like with 5 whatever Bengals players or something, any 5%, but the field, you didn't have any of those in there, when really there's actually like 10 or 20 or 50 onslaughts. Well, now that ROI completely changes.
So that, yeah, exactly. So that is such an interesting thing, because if people are picking up on this, if they run their and I can't speak to Stochastic or SaberSim because I don't use those products. Not to say that they're bad or wrong. I just don't have access to them. If I did, I would use them. So I would assume that's one of those things that is super sensitive to the contest sim, where Sim X product gives you 49ers in a lineup is super plus EV because it projects you to be the only one in the contest doing that. But what if 5 people in the contest do it? Like if 5 people in the contest have you duped on those 4 players, I would imagine that murders your ROI. It almost has to, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. The easiest example is small field. So like small field is where you should really be careful using some of these contest sims, depending on how they do it, because if it's like a 300 man, we'll just use NBA, a 300 man field, and it's their prediction is LeBron's in one lineup, like, well, yeah, LeBron's probably going to do pretty damn good in your ROI because it thinks you're only competing against one other team if he goes off. But let's say he's in 7 lineups or 12 lineups. Well, that drastically changes in a 300 man field. It goes from like a really good play to a really bad play. And so, solving that issue is really hard. And there's a lot of there's things, I'm not going to give any suggestions, but there are a bunch of things you could do to kind of mitigate that stuff. But there's no doubt that I would at least ask that question. Like if I was in one of these companies' forums, like, oh, how do you account for this? And then maybe they do.
No one's going to tell you, right? No one's going to tell you, and nor should they, right? Like no one's going to tell you the secret sauce, nor should they. I would say I found the tools to be helpful. I haven't had any particularly good lineups this season. Like I felt actually very good about what I've played, like in terms of both the ball knowing stuff, like in terms of like, oh, I know this ball thing. The ball thing played out. I did this way better than the field. I just didn't get it all in one lineup. And also realizing, because there's the other side. There's the ball knowing, and then there's the nerd knowing. Because the nerd knowing is a real thing this year, Brian, where you can tell where ownership projections are going to be off. So I think a great example of this last weekend, Amari Cooper was projected kind of around the industry between like 8 to 10% owned on all of these sites.
Mm-hmm.
You turn over the cards in the small field, the Virgin contest, again, the SPY, the Red Zone, the equivalent on FanDuel. He was like the 5th most owned wide receiver. He was like 20% owned because that was just a nerd play. The types of people who play in these contests are going to think he's a good play. It's kind of been, and this is probably stuff you don't concern yourself with at all, but like the second chalk syndrome. So like the 5th best running back play on DraftKings, I've noticed, ends up being like 20% more owned than they project to be. Like ownership projections are 15% and they end up being 20% quite often, because the people who are hand building, they know enough ball, they know enough about DFS to know, I don't want to play a 37% on running back, a 40% on running back, and a 30% on running back. So instead of the 37% guy, I'm going to play the guy who projects to be 11%. But if half the field does that, all of a sudden you're looking at a guy who doubles in ownership based on the hand building bros. And there is, I think, some real skill in identifying who that is going to be.
Sure, definitely. I think there's a place for no ballers or whatever you want to call it for this ownership.
Knowing nerders.
And no ballers. I think it's harder than people give credit for. They don't like track their guesses. They just go, I know Cooper's going to be higher this week. Like, see, I was right. It's like, yeah, but if you did do that 100 times for 100 players, 100 different slates, let's see how you do.
I bet I would be. It's funny you say that. I bet I would almost be better if I did track it at knowing nerd versus knowing ball. Like if you said, okay, Davis, we're gonna give you 100 instances over the course of 18 weeks where you can choose any median projection you want, and you can say that median projection is way too high or way too low, and we're also going to give you 100 projected ownerships, and you have to be directionally accurate, high or low. I bet I would almost be better at the latter than the former, because I actually I know more about my fellow nerds than I know about football, probably. I would think.
Maybe, yeah. I bet you could even do ownership probably too. But I mean, we also like you have to look at ownership projections as a distribution as well. That's the median. So it's not like if you say Amari Cooper is going to be 8% owned, that's it. Like, no, he could be 12, he could be 5, he could be whatever is actually what that number means. It's not.
I really was unaware that was how it worked. I didn't. The way I've understood it, projected ownership is that like that's the number, because it functions off of the way these sites do it is it functions off of a salary cap, right? Like it functions off of the salaries have to add up and match with the projected ownership based on the way I understand it. Isn't that correct?
Oh, no, you could project ownership from tons of different variables. Salaries is one, could be one. It's not the most predictive for predicting ownership. You could use a whole bunch of different variables. But like it's just if you take, if you made it a whole number like 8 instead of 8%, just like 8 points projected, you don't really think a guy's just going to get 8 and that's it, right? Like if he scores a touchdown, he's going to get more than 8.
Right.
And
no,
same.
I get how that works for median projection for fantasy points. I to be honest, I'm having a very like the concept of projected ownership also being a median and on a continuum and not just the number. I truly have never considered it for a moment before.
Yeah, it's definitely a distribution. Whether they know it or not, I guess it's not. There is there's never going to be a perfect ownership guess. So it's like even if you get it right,
Cody Main is pretty good at it. Shout out to my boy Cody Main from Established to Run. He's very very good at it.
He might have a tighter distribution than his competitors, but it's still like if he says somebody's 10%, it could be 5, it could be 12, it could be 9. And you just want to keep it as close as you can.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I find all this stuff, I find it all pretty fascinating, because to me, it is somewhat of a black box, like we do the Gilcast live on Sunday nights now. And after we do our cash game lineups, we run our, one of our interesting tournament teams through post contest sims. And it is so funny to be like, look how good I played. Look how good I played in the spy. I get 2% of the time I'm supposed to finish in the top 10, and you scored 89 points and lost $100. But people, the chat is like, they have pretty good questions about like, okay, what is this actually telling us? What can we learn? What are we doing here? And I don't know. Not always. I very rarely know the right answer, because I don't know so much what's going on inside the black box. They're very useful tools, although it is kind of funny. In NFL, you could definitely argue, like, what's the point? Like, people are playing so bad and doing such suboptimal things. You could probably still win in NFL contests with this like a solver, like just like with high projected points lineups.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I still think people are. I mean, the discourse for sure is definitely much higher than it was in 2017, 2018.
Right.
There's a lot more tools, a lot more people discussing high level concepts. So it's definitely tougher, but I mean, a big thing I wanted to circle back to was the projections.
Yeah.
And if you watch the Battle Royale show we do each week with Nerdy 10 or Dan, sometimes we use Cardi's projections. Sometimes we use, Run the Sims projections. And then I make up a projections based off the ADP, essentially. And you could just see the dramatic difference in the players it suggests, even though it's the exact same model. So, and in my opinion, and we just did a hour plus long talk with Shady Advice on our Endgame Syndicate website, and he is less, I don't even know what the word is, confident in people making their own projections. You'd have to go listen to what he says, but like, I still think projections, are king if you could pull it off, because you could see how it influences a top level, coder sim like Dan's.
Right.
How, like, because you'd think you could take bias out of it and all these things. Like, no, like, it still needs those inputs.
I would say it is hilarious. The intersection between Dan, who is like, again, super long-term winning DFS player, a genius coder, and we do these streams on the YouTube channel where we basically we take the ball knowing out of it, right? We just say, this is the code, this is the projection, this is the sim, and the YouTube comments and the chat and in Pete's Discord and stuff, people are just like, well, Dan doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. Like, why would he be doing this? He's taking this guy 40 spots ahead of ADP. He's doing this, he's doing that. And it's so different from the way people play, but it's exactly getting at your point, which is that it's what the projections are telling him to do. Like, you can't, well, of course you could argue with the projection and you could say the projection is wrong, but everyone is building off these, whether they know it or not. Even people who don't have a DFS subscription, if you are listening to the ETR podcast, if you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, if you listen to the Swolecast, like whatever, you are still using those projections because the projections are influencing what everyone says about the plays in the contest.
Yeah, that's true too. That's kind of meta. That's like a more meta thought. But like there's like no way around, like, that projections are ruling all this stuff still. Like, but like you said, like, you could overrule it, and in some ways you kind of have to, which is just a side note, which is why Run the Sims product is pretty interesting. It's unique in that you could actually go in there and adjust the sim correlation.
You change the inputs. I mean,
Yeah.
on Run the Sims, you can go in and this is how I play Showdown, so that I think this is why my dupe numbers are pretty good when I look. Like, when I have a good team, I'm not duped all that often. Which is not to say I'm never duped. I mean, obviously that's not the case. So like, I go in and I change the projections for a showdown, because that's easy for a showdown slate. Now, for a main slate, that is like a process and would take a long time. But for a showdown slate, there's two teams. I can be like, well, this third running back is not going to get any work. Move his market shares to 0. This fifth wide receiver is going to play more than the projections think. Move his target share from 0.5% to 3%. Take this tight end to 0, and then all of a sudden, your projections, with some pretty minute changes, are like way different than the field, which is, and those are pretty minute things. But if I was to go, like, I'm not going to do this right now, but we could pull up like last night's Kansas City Chiefs showdown slate, and I could show you my lineup different versus the raw on what they had on Run the Sims, and the Sims would look very different based on those like pretty minute changes I made.
Yeah, and that's kind of the key. You said you changed the projections. You don't change the projections. You change like the target share and the rushing share, and then that changes the projection through the sim. So like, you're changing the sim. So my point is, that's the only one that I know of where you can actually adjust the sim correlations and stuff like that and like the score of the game if you
No,
want.
you can do that. You can do that on SimLabs. So on SimLabs, you can't adjust the score of the game and the projections, but on SimLabs, what you can do is you can basically tell your sim what you want it to value in a way. So you can change the correlation weight. You could be like, in this sim, I want you to place emphasis on players in the same game. Or you can tell, because SimLabs it's kind of like its own product. It's kind of hard to explain. But in SimLabs, you can do like, I actually want the projection to matter more than like ownership in this. Like I just want higher projected
Mhm.
lineups to matter more in this run. Or you can say the projection I care about less, but I want the correlations to matter more. It's like a pretty interesting. You should fiddle around with it. You might like
Yeah.
it. Like not to generate your own lineups, but just to get a sense of like what else is out there.
Sure. That does though sound still different than what I'm talking about, where
It,
you
it is
can
it is different. Yeah.
you can go and go, no. Worthy is going to get the large bulk of the target shares. I know ball. I know the
I
Chiefs.
wish, buddy. I
and
wish.
and then go in there and actually type 50% of the shit. And so then when the sim reruns app with your changes, it goes, okay, it's a pass. Who's it going to? Well, it's going to go to Worthy more frequently. What does that mean for his projection? What does that mean for the correlations between Kelsey and Mahomes and and Worthy and Mahomes? And now are these double stacks worth it? Stuff like that. So um that is pretty cool. But like because like the three pieces, I mean, that I guess maybe two pieces, but maybe it is a third piece, is the projections, that part of the play-by-play sim, and then the field. Now, if they let you upload your own field, which some of the companies do, I know SaberSim does, um, that could be an option there, but it's kind of tough, I think, for them or any company to like allow you to kind of adjust what the field should look like, on the fly, because it takes a while to build those and stuff like that. But those are kind of the inputs you're looking at, and projections is super, super important. And you could see, by like 1 week when we used, I think it was Cardi's projections, like we got Ramondre Stevenson like in the second round in BRs, like every single draft that loved them, even though he was going like 4, 5, 6, fourth, fifth, sixth round. And that's purely because of the projections. And this was the point I was trying to make before we talked about Run the Sims. Is it like if it doesn't matter if there is a high projected, high value player in your projection set, like it doesn't matter what sim you're going to use, it's going to like them.
Yes.
So if you want to like fade some higher owned guy who's like obviously good value, like you're going to have to manually change something. There's like nothing, there's no sim that's going to go, oh, no. This
Yeah,
guy,
don't
even though you're
don't
projecting
play
him
the
for tons of points, he's going to fail.
so that is I mean that's kind of the crux of the thing, because what Sims have done for me as a player is basically been like, you can't give up that many points from the projected optimal in a lineup. It's harder for me to get away with I think Marvin Harrison Jr. this year is a pretty good example. He just never really projects that well. He projects all right, but he's expensive in DFS contests, and he projects for like, I don't know, 15 points or whatever. There's always like 11 wide receivers less expensive than him who project for more points. But like sometimes I want to play Marvin Harrison Jr., if the matchup is in a certain way. And it's very hard for me to find plus EV lineups with Marvin Harrison Jr. in them. Like he's just a specific example. I mean, you could extrapolate that example to like Derrick Henry or Saquon Barkley. These guys who are just their DFS salaries are very expensive, and they project not that well relative to their counterparts. What you end up having to do is, if you wanted to is you have to you have to fudge the projection. You either have to project the guy for more points or project other guys for fewer points. There's not really another way to get, higher sim ROI than that.
Yeah, you have to no ball and then make no ball changes. The I think there's another avenue, and that is sort of some portfolio management kind of ideas. Because really, if you think about it, like, so let's say, who was projected high, who you kind of wanted to fade, but this week, but Sims would never let you. Mason, maybe?
Jordan Mason. Yeah, Jordan
Okay.
Mason.
So, like, it doesn't matter whose product you subscribe to or build your own. It's going to still suggest Jordan Mason a decent amount.
Correct.
I was under on Tyler Kraft this week. That was another one.
Wow, you do not know ball.
Turns out, I was like, "Ooh, that's sharp. Ooh, that's sharp right there." No, and it was for about 3 quarters. But anyways. So, you're going to get a ton of Jordan Mason either way, unless you manually flub it. But what you're really, is like the no ballers really thinking is those on the distributions of the Jordan Mason lineups, those ones where he does poorly on the bottom, I'm going to do so well. And I think there's a few more of those than this sim is saying. That's kind of what you're saying. Like, you're not, Jordan Mason's not going to totally suck most of the time. Like, right? Like, that's not a realistic opinion, I don't think. Like, it can't be, you can't, like, when the industry and everybody is like, somebody's projected like for 17, you can't say, no, he should be projected for 5. That's not, when a guy's going to touch the ball 20 times or something, that's not really realistic. You just think there's like a lower end for whatever reason that it's not capturing. So what you could do there is you could force in the highest EV Mason lineups in your portfolio somehow, where they are sort of like non-correlated, best you can lineups. So like when Jordan Mason does bad, who does well? Like that could be a lineup, and then to mix with your Jordan Mason lineups that you're like kind of the sim is forcing you to get in there. Now, the problem with that is his distribution. He might be so well projected that you're not even going to find a lot of good lineups.
There was a lot of that this last week where the top, like what I like to do is run like the top 150 EV double stacks just to kind of see what they are, best sim ROI double stacks. And it was all it's been my brain, sorry, it's Tuesday already, so my brain is already dust. But I remember top 150 double stacks were all Brock Purdy. It was Brock Purdy and Jordan Love. That was it. And it was all, Tucker Kraft, Dontavian Wicks, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle. Couldn't even get Kittle. Actually, couldn't even get Kittle in the double stacks because Debo and Ayuk projected so much better, and because the Sims like Tucker Kraft so much. And again, that was an instance where I was like, I don't know if you call that knowing ball or what. I was just like, I just don't want to be that similar to the field. Like, I want to do some slightly different stuff. And obviously there are an infinite number of positive sim ROI lineups. That's the other thing, is you can, using the best plays, still get to like a truly unbelievable combination of positive sim ROI lineups. You don't have to play a 2v2 from the cash game train. You don't have to do Adam Levitan's cash game team and then change the defense to get a positive sim ROI lineup. And that is kind of where I'm struggling as someone who, I'm still a hand builder at heart. I still, manually submit my lineups and build them out and everything and then test them against the Sims, is knowing heuristically how to get to positive sim ROI lineups that are not just, duping the cash game train.
Well, I mean, if it makes a bunch of lineups for you too automatically, then you could test all those and then pick your favorite ones. If you're struggling,
that's the way they all work. They all work. You can generate 150, 200, 300, whatever you want, and then test the highest sim ROI lineups or sim lab score or EV on Run the Sims. And sometimes they look good. Sometimes the lineup that gives you 312% ROI on Run the Sims looks really good. And sometimes, it has Bo Melton in it, and you're like, I don't know if I'm going to play
that. yeah. That, man, it's the Jordan Mason thing. even if you dock him a bunch of points, you'll
Right.
still get a lot of them. You know what I mean? So like usually
Yes.
all it does is just give you less of them. But you're right. Like, I mean, your general point there, like if you just don't make a Jordan Mason lineup, there's still going to be a bunch of EV plus EV,
Thousands.
thousands of lineups
Hundreds of thousands.
you could pick from. I think the way to do it, I mean, unless you really know ball and fading someone like that completely, I don't know if that, I mean, you'd really have to know ball to be certain that you're right making that big of a fade. Like the way I kind of think about it, I've done this in some of my sims before. It didn't really work out that great, but I still think there's something there. Is like if you picture a field live running, like a GPP on DraftKings, we're Sunday, it's 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. Those lineups are constantly in flux, right? Somebody's moving up and then somebody's going down because someone else is moving up, right? You just think of those lineups as lineup 1, lineup 2, lineup 3, lineup 4, kind of like a stock ticker, kind of. It's like going up and then going down, going up and going down, but they're all connected. So like lineup 50 is correlated to lineup 275 somehow, right? But some of those lineups are correlated quite a bit. And so you could see like lineup 250 and lineup 50, when this one scores, this one drops. And actually maybe a whole bunch of them drop, right? And so if you could find out, if you could somehow, I mean, you're not going to be able to do this on a public sim. You're going to have to do this on yourself. But maybe you could kind of think it through when you're making your Jordan Mason fades, which lineups are going to be benefiting and moving up when the other ones move down. And then if you could, and then this way, if you build your portfolio based on this idea, you're really minimizing your risk while you implementing your no ball takes.
So like I was about to say, like, oh, that's very easy, but it's not. It's totally not, because your thought would be, oh, Jordan Mason lineups aren't doing well. Well, that just means that like Brock Purdy with George Kittle and Debo have to be doing well. But it's so much more complex than that, because it's actually more, well, who took Derrick Henry for 7,800 instead of Jordan Mason for 7,400, and they have a cheaper defense, and Henry sucked against the Bengals. But imagine a world where Henry did well. So those lineups are doing well, and the 49ers lineups are doing well, and lineups that did a wide receiver in the flex are probably doing well, and Tyrone Tracy lineups are doing well because he was a $4,300 running back, and he wouldn't have made so much sense in a Jordan Mason lineup. And then so you think level one is, oh, it's very simple. It's very simple to figure out what would do well and when Jordan Mason gets 9 points, but it's actually, there's like 9 levels of thinking you have to get through, and the sim is going to do a better job of thinking through that than you are.
Or is it? Because it's really hard to do, and we already talked about the pitfalls of projections and projecting the field, and now you got to add on this layer, so it gets really complicated. Like the post contest sim, you could easily, because now you know who everyone's picked. And so you could go, okay, what lineup would have been great here to pair with my Mason lineup? I got to add this Mason lineup because I'm going to trust the Sims enough to add 10 Mason lineups out of my 50 entries or whatever, Now what do I want to do with the final 40? So, I mean, you do just, in the end, you have to like just trust the company you're subscribing to, and then do the best you can with the information. But you're right. It's really complicated to figure that out. And then also, how far down do you want to go? So like, let's say, okay, we got Tracy, we got Derrick Henry, we got Mason, we got to think about all these guys. Am I making just like a dog shit lineup now? Like, am I just making like all these guys, these, 2 to 5% owned guys? Cause it's just so easy for me to go like, oh, I can't take Mason. I know that. That's the whole start of this idea. Now if I don't take Mason, now that means I can't take Henry, because everyone who doesn't take Mason is taking Henry. And then also, now that, I have to take Kittle, because if Mason's not getting the points, Kittle's got to be getting the points. But then this lineup sims for, minus 400% ROI. Like, is that worth it? Because that is something I found in my research, is that there is like a cutoff to this kind of thought process of like these lineups are just they're not good enough. And so like I'm stuck with Mason anyways. So like why waste all my time? So but I do think there is something to that idea, but more generally too. We talked about this as well with Shady. There's some real advice in that video that you can. It won't solve your Jordan Mason issue, but it might help lower your variance by thinking like Kenneth's way.
Do you don't have to give too much away, but do you rerun your sims after you get real ownerships and points in the afternoon before the afternoon games lock? I'd have to think high level players are doing that.
For NBA, yeah, not for NFL, not this year. I do have it set up for that, although I haven't done it this year. I wonder if hopefully it's not broken because everything breaks.
I was going to say, I mean, again, I don't know anything. I feel like that would be costing you money because I feel like there's such an informational edge. Not even if you couldn't tell your machine the scores, you could tell it the ownerships and it would know the salary of the players who were owned, and then it could I guess theoretically, I'm assuming it could recalculate the ownerships of the players in the afternoon games based on what it knows the field has already done with the salary spent by the field.
Yeah, it is, but it's not as easy as you think because you have to then guess what your opponents are going to be doing, what your opponents will be doing with the remaining slots available on their teams. And then they're going to be doing a variety of things too, because they're not just going to take, Jordan Mason. They might take, Jordan Mason and Kittle. They might take, Ayuk and whoever, like if there's in the flex, like they might have. So there's a distribution on what is going to be in there. It's complicated. And is the juice worth the squeeze? It probably is, but I'm just lazy. So yeah, I mean, you probably should be doing that, but it's really hard to do that. I wonder if I think SaberSim actually might do it, but I mean, you want to be careful. You might want to be careful with that. You got to make sure you really trust a late swap optimizer because it could get you in some trouble and put some ridiculous guesses at there where it makes you. I had one last year when the millie, like the high stakes millie, I DM'd you. I was in second and I had Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. I could pick between the two of them.
Oh, I wonder who I told you to play.
I didn't get a response from you in time, I think. Or I maybe I asked you after I made my decision, after it locked. But you said Deebo Samuel, and I of course picked Ayuk. And took like third or fourth, yeah. And the reason I'm bringing this up isn't for my pity party, is because the sim told me to take Kittle. And I'm like, this can't be fucking right.
Can't be right.
Yeah.
Can't be right. And that actually, Brian, that is so fucking on it. Because basically, every time I get a question in YouTube chat or whatever about Sims, it's people being like, well, this can't possibly be fucking right. This is just wrong. The sim, pre-contest lock Sims, people don't do that because they can control the information they're feeding it. They feed it a lineup until it gives them the green number that they want. And then they're like, all right, me and the sim agree. But anything post-contest wise, anything because again, we do this show every week. And basically it'll be my dog shit lineups, Sammy's dog shit lineups, and Nate's dog shit lineups. And the computer says, even when it knows the ownership, even if we played some bad chalk, and it tells us we played good, the chat, and honestly kind of me, I'm like, well, I don't think I played that good here, or I did play that good here. I'm like, well, this just can't be fucking right. It just can't be.
It's right from a certain point of view, Luke. The inputs they're giving it, it's makes it right. So it's all, that's why I like having the ability to actually go in there and change all that stuff. Then, because like, let's say you change Mason down, you up Worthy, and then you rerun it, and it's still telling you to take George Kittle or whatever. Now you have no excuses. Now either you unsub from that company because you just do not trust them at all, or you play Kittle. I do think there's a difference between that and the Battle Royale too. Like, I feel like we're not trusting it enough in Battle Royale because, or just, the viewers or whatever.
So this is what I wanted to get to, and we actually went longer on. I thought we were gonna have more time to talk about Kamala, but I don't even think we're gonna get there because I like to keep these at an hour. My experience through 5 weeks of I think I've maxed every week. Maybe I didn't max week 1 BR. My experience is that it's basically the most. I think Battle Royale is the most beatable form of fantasy sports available if you want to win. You can't win a million, but you can win. This week it's 50K. Normally it's 30K. There are smaller contests where you can win smaller amounts of money, but the fields are smaller, so you're going to realize your EV more often. My general thought is the field is getting better. There are people who are playing well, but most people are playing pretty bad, and there's clearly exploitable ways to make money.
Yeah. Overall, the beatability, I think you're right. Pete's on fire, huh?
God. I mean, this is kind of neither here nor there, but Jesus fucking Christ, man. Crane wins 2 million. Now Pete is the best drafter in Battle Royale. When is it my fucking turn, man? When is it my turn, Brian? It needs to be my turn. And don't get me wrong. I think it's sick. I think Peter's good at the game. I'm not mad at Peter. I just want it to be my time.
There needs to be like a soccer, Millie, and you need to bank that.
I'm not even good at that anymore. Like I was good at soccer like 5 years ago, 4 years ago. The field is good at soccer now. That doesn't even cut it.
Well, you had the Tyler Hero moment.
I won the flagship League of Legends GPP once. That was like my last like big like no, I had an NFL one after that. But
the only person besides the NBA Top Shot founders to make money in NFTs, you and them. That was your win. What were we just talking about? I wanted to
Battle Royale.
Battle Royale but trusting the Sims, because the difference between like a DFS sim where it's going like, would take Kittle because in these iterations, Kittle, Sims out a little higher on the ROI. The Battle Royale is different. The Battle Royale is like trying to guess what your opponents are going to be doing later on, who's going to be available, in like what sort of combos and what order you should be going in, which is why I kind of built the ADP model, because I wanted it to be like, let's take the bias out of it just so we could see what does it think in what order, in waiting on this guy or picking this guy now early so we can get this combo later. So like that's a different dynamic that it's a large part of the reason for doing a sim in Battle Royale, right? Like, I mean, I don't think the projection sim stuff is that important in Battle Royale, right? I think guessing what your opponents are going to be doing or how you should be acting. And so if you're going like, oh, well, now it takes CJ Stroud in the second, that can't be right. Well, maybe it's because it's setting up Tank Dell in the sixth, or it knows your opponents don't have a tight, I don't know, whatever, all need to take wide receivers or something. And so you're not going to be able to stack quarterbacks as X, Y, and Z because your opponents need wide receivers in the next 2 rounds. Right. And you in your puny brain, our puny brains can't foresee that. And we just see, oh, CJ Stroud in the second. Well, he's a 3rd rounder. He might even go in the 4th. I'm not taking him here. And so you have to trust it. And he's not done, obviously, but let's just assume it was a completely finished product. You either just trust it or, don't use it. Don't buy into it. But my point being is there's more to it than like a DFS post contest sim.
Well, there are like so many more elements to BR. I mean, it's so funny. Like BR in many ways is like a much more simple game than salary cap DFS. Like you log on your phone and you click, you click 6 guys. I mean, obviously it's easier to create a lineup of 6 guys than 9 guys. There's fewer things you have to get right. Correlations in a 6-man game are so powerful, like insanely so, in a way that they and the field sizes are like 67,000 for the biggest contest, 67,000 entrants. That is 1/3 the size of the Millie Maker. I haven't entered the Millie Maker in so long. I don't even know how many lineups are in the Millie Maker in a given week.
I think like 300,000 or 600,000. I'll look right now.
So it's like infinitely smaller. It is so much smaller. It's basically, it's like the big battle royale is like 5x the size of the spy, where everyone just plays chalk. Like where you are laughed out of the room if you play a guy who's 1% owned in the spy or whatever. Like, you're just giving up way too much EV. But that being said, the interlocking elements of the drafts and of the because ownership percentage is, there's a group of players who are just going to be 100% owned. That maybe that's such an interesting thing that we haven't gotten into with Dan stuff, is maybe guys are being 100% owned who shouldn't be. So there's actually a rate at which you should not be taking Saquon Barkley in the first round, even if Saquon Barkley is, let's say hypothetically, Saquon Barkley is projected for 25 points. No other running back is projected more for 20. But Dan's stuff, as Dan builds this stuff out, I mean, we're at a pretty, we are in the alpha version. We're not even beta with Dan's stuff yet. Maybe his GTO, like his Nash equilibrium own, is 94%. He should be 94% drafted. That means some percentage of the time, 2% of the time, when you get a first round pick and you get the 101, you actually shouldn't take the best overall player, which is like, and I bet that's true, by the way. I bet in a world where I had a beautiful mind, if I was fucking Will Hunting, and I could just compute all this out and have the most perfect God mode sim, like I could have all knowledge. I would bet that's true. I would bet there is, at some range, where you just should not be selecting the best player in the pool if you're drafting 150 teams.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that yet, though. If you're going to
I will not be doing
yes,
that.
I think you're right. On some slates, yeah. And then what you would do is you'd have just a random 0 to 100, a randomizer somewhere where you could use your clock. And then if it's 2% of the time you don't take them, you just roll and see if it hits that 2%, and then you don't take them. But like if you're going to do 100 lineups, you're only going to get 1 in 6 first picks, and then you roll each time, so you're still most likely going to take them every single time, because you're not going to play infinite amount of entries into this thing. But your general point there, I'm sure there's, I mean, this goes to what I was saying about like trusting it a little bit more. If you're in the second or third round and it has some weird pick, like, listen, if it's not going to take Barkley 1 in 100 times, like, it's going to do some weird stuff. And that's the whole damn point of it, is that it's not going to just go down the list. I think the real edge is like, it's just too chalky. Like, I'm looking right now, the our ownership projections, they're not super accurate yet. It's only Tuesday, but we got 3 guys at basically 100% owned at QB. And then 2 guys at 60% owned, and then it kind of starts to go down. But just like on weeks where it's like at 100% owned for like 5 QBs, it seems like that can't be right. And
Even 3, even 3 quarterbacks or 3 tight ends, that can't really be right. Where I see it most often, though, is at wide receiver, where basically like the wide receiver 11 will project for 60% drafted, so like 9% owned or whatever. But then the wide receiver 22 will get drafted like 5% of the time, or something, be less than 1% owned. That, particularly at wide receiver, like quarterback, you could argue like, well, we're better at projecting quarterbacks. There's more plays. It's more iterative, whatever. I mean, at wide receiver, you can't make that argument at all. Like I'll just give you an example off the top of my head for this week. We have Jalen Tolbert for the Dallas Cowboys is the wide receiver 24 right now. He's in the highest total game of the slate, dome game, yada, yada. Not important for this conversation, but his teammate, CeeDee Lamb, is the wide receiver 1, is the first overall pick of the whole contest. And you might go, oh, dude, well, Jalen Tolbert is never outscoring CeeDee Lamb. And then you look, and Jalen Tolbert literally outscored CeeDee Lamb 2 days ago. Like, literally just did it. But the field will learn nothing from this. The field will see evidence that the thing that they thought could never happen just happened, and they will take nothing away from it.
It's interesting, the dynamic between ADP and best ball and salary and DFS. Salary is almost a negative bias, I would say, where ADP is a positive bias. So there's definitely an anchoring effect. I would say that's almost for sure with ADP.
I will guarantee you there's an anchoring effect.
But with salary, you like that costs a lot of my 50,000. It's almost a negative effect.
Can't play Marvin Harrison Jr., dude. He doesn't project good at 7,500, but Marvin Harrison Jr. at ADP, just so funny. Marvin Harrison Jr. ADP like wide receiver 7 in BRs, like 100% drafted. He's 2% owned in salary cap DFS. Like no one will play him. Yeah, that's so funny.
Yeah, it's a super interesting phenomenon. So like this week right now we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, basically 9 guys getting drafted at wide receiver 100% of the time, close to it, 90 plus. Harrison's one of them. And then even like McLaurin at like 80%. So like 73% Nico. I mean, that's that right there. That's two wide receivers per team. That's over 12. And so how many wide receivers do you think get drafted on average? Like 2.3?
Really low. The field's pretty woke to wide receivers not scoring as much points as running backs this year. Yeah.
So 2.1, 2.2, 2.3.
Something like that. Yeah.
So that's all the wide receivers. So if you take, I mean, Tolbert's 13%. I just looked him up. Like you don't even have to do that non-correlated thing, like if Tolbert goes off, that means that there's CeeDee Lamb didn't get those touchdowns. You could just go to the next guy in the tier. And it's like, oh wow, he's getting owned, 10% of the time. I mean, we do need to run what that looks like, but it just seems inefficient due to the anchoring of ADP to me for a lot of those positions. And you mentioned wide receiver, and it looks like again this week that's going to be another one. Tight end too sometimes. Tight end too. Actually, tight end might be worse than wide receiver. So,
well, yes, yeah. Where I mean, not to make this the bad beat show, but like Isaiah Likely last week was like the tight end 11, and he scored 2 touchdowns, and I had 13% of him. Like basically, like legit, like a hero call that should have made me rich, like the type of thing that you get right about once every 3 years, and every tight end in the slate scored 17 points. Like literally every, Bauer smash. In fact, Kraft even at tight end 5 ends up giga smashing. So
the Kraft one I thought was a donkey play. I still played him like 12% of the time, but so McBride, Ferguson 100%, Bowers, Laporta 87, Tucker, Kraft 74%. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 5 of the 6. Is Isaiah Likely at 6.7% owned that far off from some of these guys?
No.
Jake Ferguson?
Yeah, like it's not surprising to anyone if Isaiah Likely could be the highest scoring tight end in the slate, and he'd be like, yeah, he's already done it twice. Like he's already been awesome already.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is where I am focusing more of my energy on drafting these contests this year for this reason. Like I think there's some pretty simple things you can do to be plus EV in them. And I can't, like, we just did 45 minutes on how to beat DraftKings salary cap DFS, and I have no answers, and I'm just trying to play as good as I can. And Battle Royale, I'm like, I'm just very clearly drafting teams that over the long run, if each week we ran the contest, 10,000 times, I would make money. So I just need to realize that EV in this lifetime.
Yeah, and hopefully their battle royales they don't lock half an hour early each week, because that's usually when I'm putting my BRs in and it gets filled. So
it overlaid last week.
no, it was done 20 minutes early.
So that that's just how they have to do it. So that there's no information. Well, I think so that there's like no informational edge or whatever. Like the game couldn't start while you're drafting a BR or something. But it overlaid a smidge.
Oh, so I got to get in there early.
You got to get in there early. All right, Brian, let's wrap it up. Tell the people if they enjoyed this nerdery, what they can get on Endgame Syndicate to improve their DFS games.
You can get more conversations like this, but we have a bunch of new stuff coming out.
People who are good at DFS instead of me are the ones bouncing their ideas off of Brian.
Yeah, we have basically like instructional videos on how to do the nerd stuff, different game theory series from Dan, and R, and some stat stuff, and projecting ownership from me. And Yuta's got some no ball videos. He's got a NBA one, I think, coming out, or an NFL one. I can't remember what he said he's going to do in the next day or two. If it's not out already, I haven't really looked. And we're going to do a roundtable tomorrow, Davis, where we answer questions, and we have a Discord too. So where we'll BS and answer somehow. It's a small but sharp community too, and so a lot of the pros are in there answering questions too, like Shady, and he was kind enough to do a video with us. We're gonna have a couple more of those guys do some behind the paywall videos with us coming up, and we have the Draft Caddy.
Draft Caddy. I'm never going back to not using the Draft Caddy. All right, boys, we are going to get out of here. If you're listening to this on audio, please consider subscribing to the YouTube. I would love to continue building that up. And if you did watch on YouTube, thank you. Like, subscribe, and I will be back with all of you next week.